Hi, everybody. And thank you, Megan and Aaron and Hillary and the Alberta Equestrian Federation for giving us the opportunity to have a chat. I'm always struck by this technology, and isn't it wild that we're all getting used to this kind of interaction now in what is a really short period of time. I mean, 8 or 10 weeks ago, I didn't even know what Zoom was, I admit it. And now Zoom calls are just the norm. And I was saying to the ladies before I got on the call here today that we as an organization have a partners meeting scheduled, or a spring partners meeting. We get together from all over the country and each year and twice a year. And tomorrow is a scheduled date. And of course, we're not getting together in person. So we were checking on the Zoom technology today and across the company so that we can make sure that tomorrow we're on board. And it's incredibly efficient. I mean, it works beautifully, and as much as it can be interactive, it can also be done in a format like this. But we're all very much getting used to this new normal. So with that having been said, I'm looking at the participant list and I see some familiar names, probably folks that I've had the chance to speak with or interact with over these last several weeks. Being sort of the pointy end on the stick in our organization for these programs across the country. Of course, I've spoken to literally thousands at this point of individuals who are industry participants, whether they be individual members, horse owners, coaches, facility operators, business enterprise, veterinarians, farriers, I mean, just the whole gambit. And it's been a very interesting time for me to try and gather information and intelligence from an industry that I cherish and that we provide service to, so that we can all sort of get through this together. So there's sort of that phrase that we're hearing so much, is we're very much in this together. And frankly, like all of you on this call, I mean, insuring industry and us as a brokerage, I mean, we're all learning this too. We don't have the golden or the silver bullet answers always. This is unprecedented for insurers to try and manage through the risks associated with a pandemic. Not many of us were around in 1913 or whatever it was for the Spanish flu, so it's pretty new. And there's no question that the impact that this is having on our industry specifically is dramatic and significant in every region in the country. And now what I'm hearing more than anything from folks when I speak to them every day is just this heightened anxiety about what's going to be at the other end of this, and when is that other end coming. And that does also seem to vary from province to province, space to space. I know that in Alberta, your premier made some announcements yesterday. Undoubtedly, there will be more today. And again, I think we can all be fairly grateful for the leadership that all the governments are offering at this point. Again, in unprecedented times, doing unprecedented things, trying to manage us as human beings and as a population who are habitually lazy and are turning to our leaders for guidance so that we can navigate through all this. As far as Alberta Equestrian Federation is concerned, though, and the insurance that we partner with them to provide to you, obviously that's the purpose in this call, so I'll get to that. I want to say this sort of generally, that the insurance coverage that we provide to you as members, facility operators, coaches, whatever, has not been adversely affected by COVID. There is nothing in your policy that says that your policy will provide protection under the description that we provide, except when there's COVID. It doesn't say that. Never did say that, and never will say that, or at least I don't anticipate it will. The reality is that the types of products that we provide in the marketplace are not affected by sickness or disease. To be specific, the liability insurance that we provide to an individual member of AEF speaks to the ownership, use, or lease or of an animal, of a horse, which obviously is not affected by the presence of COVID. The ownership of the animal remains exactly as it was before COVID, and presumably will be exactly as it is now after COVID. So it's not affected. So if a horse that you own, lease, borrow, causes bodily injury or property damage to someone else, even in these times, and you were sued as a result of that ownership, because you can't sue your horse, then you're absolutely covered. And I can tell you as an audience today that during COVID, we have had our predictable number of claims, as we normally would in a program of this scope that provides coverage to so many and from coast to coast. And All of those claims have been responded to, and horses continue to escape onto the roadway and do the dumb things that horses do sometimes. So there's no question that that coverage remains fully enforced. The other policy that's provided automatically, the accident, death, and dismemberment policy for members, again, is unaffected by the presence of COVID, because frankly, COVID or disease is not one of those insured perils. So if someone, God forbid, a member of AEF contracted COVID-19, the policy does not respond to that. It was not designed to respond for disease. It was designed and continues to provide coverage in an environment where an interaction with a horse is the cause for the accident that leads to the catastrophic or permanent injury, and that's where the coverage would respond to. So again, not a disease-related policy, so it is unchanged and unaffected by the presence of COVID. Same with the optional insurance policies that are available to members. Again, if you step back from it just for a moment, you'll recognize that none of those policies are adversely affected by COVID. So it's just not an issue. So moving away from the members for a moment, in terms of the coverage we provide, I've been asked the question numerous times about whether or not you are allowed to ride by the insurer. And again, I go back to what I've just said, and that is, it's not really for us to say whether you should or can ride. Insuring companies, and certainly not CapriCMW as a brokerage, nor the AAF, nor Equestrian Canada, have the authority to tell you what you can and can't do when you get out of bed in the morning. If your day includes getting in the tack, then you're doing so at your own risk, at your own peril. The only thing that we're all very cognizant of at this point in time in Canada and around the world is that government and health authorities are recommending strongly in some cases, mandating in other cases, building laws around it in some certain circumstances to restrict our activity. Again, with the overall objective of trying to keep this COVID-19 under some control, which frankly, it does seem to be working. I think all of us are aware that there is some positive news on the telly now, which has been so dire and so dark from around the world. Countries and regions around the world are starting to open up their doors slightly. Very measured approach, very cautious approach, asking desperately for humans, for all of us, citizens, to be responsible in our actions, to maybe wear masks now as just a matter of course, to make sure we continue to wash our hands till we rub the skin off our bones, and do the things that they know and have proven will help us all stay safer as a population. So I'm hopeful that in our discourse today, and I'm going to get to the equestrian stuff, guys, I promise, but it's no different in our equestrian activity than is being sort of relayed in every other environment on the planet. And it's a conversation I've had with many folks to say, you know, horse people are special to me, but frankly, the fact that they own a horse or choose to have horses as part of their lifestyle doesn't make them any more or less resilient to contracting COVID-19 or any more or less responsible for their own actions, or if you're a business operator, how you manage your facility and manage your site to make sure that you, your staff, your family remain safe, and that your customers, if you're in a public-facing environment, are also safe. The challenges we face in the horse industry in terms of infrastructure, I mean, barns and arenas and outdoor rings are very different than a restaurant setting, obviously, but we still have a responsibility to try and manage how this COVID-19 could potentially spread in our environment, which will be a nice segue to talk about facility operators for just a moment. So many questions have come in over time on both sides of an issue surrounding boarders being allowed to visit a farm or boarding place to ride their horse. And obviously on the border side, they are very anxious to get back in the tack. They're very anxious to see their horse. They want to make sure that their animal's safe. They feel they have absolute rights to make sure that those conditions are being met. And no one's debating that they certainly have ownership responsibilities. But on the other side of the coin is the boarding place, that facility that is that public-facing service that is saying to their boarders in many cases, I don't want you here. And I don't want you here because I fear for my own health. I fear for my family's health, my staff's health, and frankly, I fear for your health. I don't have the capacity or the infrastructure to sanitize every surface you might touch on my property. I don't have the ability to do those things. And I may have compromised health myself. I may have a compromised health family member who has health issues. What if I get sick? What if I, as the boarding place manager, get sick? Or what if my staff gets sick? We have this other responsibility as facility operators to manage the horse. And frankly, the board costs that are charged, frankly, were never designed to give unfettered rights to boarders to enter the premises. They were set up and fee structures were established to provide care for the animal. And presuming that the boarding place continues to provide that service, and frankly, that's probably where their legal responsibility ends. We've heard anecdotal information, mostly on social media, nothing concrete in my view, that boarders are concerned that the boarding place is not providing adequate care for their animal, and so they feel this heightened anxiety to get onto the property, in spite of the boarding facility's reluctance to allow them to go. My advice to those folks has been and continues to be, if you're that concerned, then you need to call a veterinarian who can then reach out to the boarding place to ask the appropriate questions to ensure that the animal is healthy and sound, or healthy and safe. And if the veterinarian is somewhat of an objective opinion, provides you with the assurance that the boarding place is doing the job, frankly, that should do it. So in terms of where we are right now in this whole process, the health and welfare of the animal is where we've been trying to encourage people to focus. And that sort of speaks to the coaches as well, that this whole notion of me as a rider athlete having some overwhelming right to go onto premises or ride a horse or be involved in what is clearly an athletic endeavor, a recreational endeavor for 99% of folks, is just fully against what public health authorities are recommending very strongly that we don't do at this time. So I hope that the folks can step back from it for a moment and just say, look, my personal needs have to take some second step or second stage, second seating to the primary need, which is the health and welfare of the animal. On that note, health and welfare of the animal, which is governed by federal law and provincial law, is frankly the only reason that the word stables exists on that essential service list in the province of Alberta. Stables are recognized as the housing for large animals, just as zoos are the housing for exotic animals, just as kennels and catteries are the housing for dogs and cats. And so the government, in their wisdom, appropriately made sure that those facilities remained open for staff and essential caregivers to be on site so that the animals can be taken care of. But that's all they meant. They didn't mean operations on a stable or in a stable. They didn't mean operations in a zoo. They didn't mean operations in a kennel. You can be certain that they're not doing dog agility classes at a kennel anytime soon. You can be sure that they're not doing class outings at the zoo anytime soon. But staff are still on site in those facilities, making sure that the animals are cared for. Same basic principle applies to barns, guys. It's just a harsh reality. We've checked with public health authority, I assure you, this is not just my opinion. And that same reference, frankly, exists in several of the provinces. They seem to, in the early days of COVID-19, many of the provinces did get together and collaborate on what they determined to be essential services, essential businesses, including insurance, which is why I'm at work. But in terms of stables, the reference was clearly about making sure that veterinarians, farriers, folks that care for the animals and throw a flake of hay at them every day are still able to do that work to make sure that the animals don't suffer. So that's sort of my take on that reference in the legislation that exists in Alberta and elsewhere. So as far as what allowing boarders to come, and I know I'm kind of going about this in a circuitous way, and I apologize for that, but the reality is a landowner, frankly, has ultimate right over their property. Boarding facility managers have every right to evaluate risk on their property. In fact, they have a legal responsibility to do so. And once that risk has been identified, determine the best course of action to manage it before allowing anyone on site. So if they feel that they don't want folks on the property for whatever reason, whether it's pure fear, whether it's anxiety, or some of the reasons I mentioned earlier, then frankly, they have the right to say no. And if people still sort of get belligerent about it, then they have every right to phone the police and advise them that people are trespassing on the property without permission. So horse ownership has to take second stage to this, and it's just the realities of where we are. But that is how the law applies. And that's important because boarding facilities have that same responsibility to assess risk, even outside of COVID. You know, if there's been an ice storm and the parking lot's full of ice and whatever the case might be, or there's been some other catastrophe on the property or some other hazard has been identified on the property, they have the right and frankly have the legal responsibility to make sure that people don't come. And as a boarder, I've certainly been told many times that I can't go to the barn because of adverse conditions, snowstorm, ice storm, I mean, weather-related issues, high winds. I mean, all those things are very real risks that put me at peril if I'm a visitor to the property. COVID's no different. Now, that's that side of the coin. Let's talk about, well, what if you do decide to allow people to come to the barn? How do you manage that? There's a big question. What we learned, or what we're learning, all of us, is that there's an expectation that operators of business, myself included, have a responsibility to make sure that sanitization equipment is available and perhaps protective equipment, masks and so forth are available. I've had coaches talk to me over the last week about their plan to reestablish their business relationship with their customers and how they're planning to do it in terms of teaching riding. Some of the strategies include going to their public health authority, which is what the theme is here today. I want to tell you that again and again and again, that if you can come up with a plan that makes sense to a public health official in your region, and they give you approval to operate whatever element of your business you feel you must get back to, then that's all the approval you need. It is the approval you need, not the only approval, but from a legal perspective, it's the approval you require. So I've had coaches say, well, I'm going to teach my boarder clients. I'm going to provide some sort of a supervised riding session. I don't want to characterize it as being a lesson because frankly, right now, whether the student in the tack has got a straight back and their heels down and their hands up off the horse's withers is not my concern at the moment. But as an equine industry professional, I recognize that the animal has some needs at the moment, and those needs include exercise. And we're not talking about show fit exercise. We're talking about the animal moving about freely so that we avoid the potential for colic and other sickness issues or health-related issues. These are grazing animals, as we all know. And frankly, if they were allowed to do what they normally and naturally do, they wouldn't be in a barn. They wouldn't be in a round pen. They'd be out on a pasture somewhere, just wandering around as they need to do the things that they do to survive. So I think with those sorts of mindsets in mind, coaches that want to interact with their customers and allow them to ride should be focusing particularly on the physiological requirements of the horse and not so much on the athletic ambitions of the rider. And there's lots of things that a coach can offer in terms of knowledge and expertise to share with their amateur clients, the boarders, to assist them in trying to understand some of those needs that the horse has. I can speak to an anecdotal story, and some folks will say, well, the horse doesn't have to be ridden to be exercised. It could be lunged, could be turned out. I used to show many years ago, and one of the show horses I had was a thoroughbred mare. You could not turn this mare out. She did not know how to be a horse. She only knew how to be in a stall. She didn't lunge very well, frankly. And so if I were still the owner of that horse today, I would very much be that boarder saying, look, I have to ride this horse. She can't stand in her stall. She will tear the barn apart. She doesn't lunge well, and you cannot turn her out. I've got to come and I've got to sit in the tack, at which point she will be a pussycat. She'll be happy mentally and physically. And I will do that on your schedule as a boarding place that you tell me. And I won't touch any surfaces, or those surfaces I do touch, I commit to you that I'll sanitize after I visit. And I'll make sure that we're social distancing in the barn and that I'm perhaps the only person riding. I'm going to bring my coach with me. So if I do crash and burn, I've got somebody on the ground that knows how to manage that incident. And my coach is prepared to take that responsibility on, which again is a bit of a segue, but an important one. Coaches who are so anxious to get back into the ring to teach their students have to recognize that they also then have a responsibility to do the job. So the question I asked her was asked to me actually about a week ago by a coach was, okay, so I'm teaching Mike how to do whatever. I'm monitoring the session, and Mike's horse hasn't been out enough, so it's fresh as a daisy, and bucks Mike off, and Mike ends up in a pile of rubble in a corner. Just a ton of questions about horse shows and clinics and other group gatherings. And as much as I'm a huge fan of horse shows, and I've been to so many clinics around the world that it's nuts, perpetual learner. But I can't imagine. I in my head I just can't seem to fathom how a show organizer or even a clinic in a clinic environment with auditors watching the lesson, as it were, how that can be done and still maintain the protocols and guidelines that are being set very clearly out by all public health authorities around the world. I just have a really hard time with that. I for one, have sort of said quite publicly that I'm hopeful that the sanctioning bodies from across the country and across disciplines will very soon realize that if they are going to come back to play, which I hope they will, that they do so somewhere down the road. I mean, far down the road. Maybe 8, 12 weeks from now, maybe 16 weeks from now. Maybe there's no season this year at all. Maybe that's just how it is. Maybe we're all just going to have to get used to the idea that our activities and our actions and our movements have been restricted. But it is actually for our own benefit. It's not being done prejudiciously. It's certainly being done to hopefully keep us out of the hospital and keep people that we know and love out of the hospital as well. I've had facilities talk about doing video lessons, which is something that just terrifies me, not only as someone who did coach at one point in my career, but also even as a student. Having a remote lesson with a professional coach who's sitting, conceivably in their living room with me in the TAC does not present in a risk manager's mind any kind of a safe environment. Too many things can happen in a heartbeat. A horse could take a bad step. I end up in a heap. Even if somebody, some kids on my iPhone watching me go around the ring so my coach can see what I'm doing, who's going to save me? Who's going to anticipate that the cat just came in the arena and is about to spook my horse when it's off camera? The coach would if he or she was on the ground in the lesson environment. But somebody holding the camera and focusing on me and trying to keep it in focus and trying to do all those things that a camera person might do is not the same. So at this point in time, if the question does arise in the chat room, the answer is no. The insurers we represent liability for coaches who choose to do real-time video lessons. Now, I'll qualify that as the insurer in coaches who say, look, ahead of time on the phone, Mike, I want you to work on the left lead. I want you to do half passes. I want you to do something on your horse. Again, focusing on what that horse needs right now, not in terms of trying to maintain show fitness, but just based on some physiological needs that I think this horse has as the coach. So, Mike, these are the things I want you to do in this session. I'd like you to film it. And then after those things are done, you can send that film to me and I'll analyze it and see if you did okay, or I'll see what improvements might need to be made for the next time. But that's not real-time coaching. That's a very different environment. And in my world, in my head at least, that makes much more sense. So the coach is still definitely having that interactive sort of session, but it's not in real time. So again, that's just how I feel about it. It's one man's opinion and the opinion of the insurers that we represent. But I wanted to address that very specifically because it is something that's come up more than once.
Okay, Mike, maybe pretty soon here we'll get the Q&A going here.
Do it now. I just noticed it's 1:30. So 30 minutes. We said 30 minutes, didn't we? Oh, look at that.
Yeah, for sure.
30 minutes.
So we'll have that open. So for anyone who did arrive after opening, again, please utilize your chat function, which is at the bottom of your window to ask your question. However, if your chat function doesn't appear to be working, if there's any technical difficulties, you can also open the participant window and you have the option to raise your hand. So it's a little blue hand to ask a question and we can unmute you. We will just ask you to press the button after your question is answered so your hand will go down. So whenever anyone's ready, we've already had a couple questions come in, so we'll address those and we'll go from there.
Okay, our first question is from Kristen. Kristen, perhaps your question might have also been answered towards the end of what Mike was saying. But it says, as a client, we are being told that insurance companies are not covering incidents that occur during lessons, flat or jumping, being offered at this time. Is that true or false?
Well, I can't speak for all insurers, so I have to qualify my statement somewhat. What I said earlier in the session is still true now, and that is that the insurance coverage that I provide to a coach is unaffected by the presence of COVID. The expectation of the insuring companies that we all represent, whether it's us or my illustrious competitors, is that when people are out in the world, they're acting in compliance with the laws that are set out before them. And so if the government has said, thou shalt not, and made it a law, and you decide to go ahead and do those things anyway, and then a claim ensues, the insurance company could very easily say, no, what? Yeah, no, there was intent here. We don't think that you sort of deserve coverage under the policy because you blatantly broke the law. That could happen. As far as discipline-specific activities, again, we have not said such things at CapriCMW. I'm aware anecdotally that maybe some other insuring companies have. I don't see the difference, frankly, in the risk in these COVID times. Whether I'm jumping a 4-foot fence or doing a dressage test or running a reining pattern or cutting cows. I mean, what's the difference? I don't understand the relevance of discipline. Is the idea that those higher risk activities like jumping a big fence or doing cross country or some other particularly risky activity would put you at risk to potentially or more likely end up in a hospital? Okay, but I'm not sure I understand the relevance of the COVID issue. It's either you're doing it or you're not doing it, and are you doing it with the recommendations and approval from public health authority? I think that's the question that should be asked and answered, and that answer can only come from the public health official.
Thank you, Mike. Our second question comes from Kayla. She says, at what point in Alberta's relaunch strategy is it appropriate to allow boarders back to ride? When would it be appropriate in the relaunch strategy to resume riding lessons on boarder-owned horses versus lesson horses?
Okay, so we'll talk about this. I'll be brief, I promise. So again, I get back to this whole notion of what's in the best interest of the horse first. And if the herd manager, the facility operator, is convinced in their own mind that the best thing that can happen for the horses in their care is that they begin to be ridden, if they haven't been already. I have no particular argument with that if it's in a controlled environment where scheduling is done and sanitization protocols are put in place and this PPE equipment is available for people both entering the property or that are on the property. But none of that should happen unless public health authorities have said you can do it. Same thing with lessons. I don't think we're at a lesson stage yet. I don't, anywhere in the country. I don't get the sense that government officials, even though they're starting to crack the door open, are encouraging facilities that offer lessons or instruction to the general public in athletic endeavors, whether it's riding, soccer, baseball, any number of other summertime sports, swimming lessons, tennis. None of those discussions, I haven't heard any. And I must admit, I've become a news junkie, not by desire, but I do have a tendency to spend several hours, in fact, in the evening trying to catch the glimpses, at least, or parts of the press releases and the public announcements that all the provinces are making to try and keep up on this. And I have not heard an iota about recreational sport as being on the radar. So again, it's a discussion, frankly, between the facility operator, the coach, and that public health authority that governs over their region, their municipality, their county, to have the conversation about what protocols you anticipate or that you would like to put in place to get their blessing. As far as the schoolies go, school horses are no different than the boarder's horse. in terms of their exercise needs, maybe slightly different in terms of what their fitness levels are. But again, if school barns are struggling to get all the animals exercised, if they're getting scared about how much weight those schoolies are putting on because they're eating like horses and not working the way that they used to, which is sort of a question like manage the feed, folks. You can do that to try and keep some of the weight off these animals. But again, I don't discount the importance of getting some of those schoolies out under tack. So who does the riding? Is it an experienced student that you engage that understands some of the risks that are surrounding COVID? Maybe. Again, that's not an unreasonable risk management strategy in some circumstances. Does it mean wholesale lessons to the beginners and the intermediate riders just to get sort of without sort of any consideration given to the public health authority? I think the answer is no. So again, the answer is go to the public health authority with the question. I think that there's a reasonable question to be asked, and hopefully that you'll be provided with a reasonable answer in writing, and get it in writing, guys. It's important.
Okay, I'm going to unmute the line for Patricia Doms, who has a question here. Patricia, I'm just going to unmute you now, so please proceed. Oh, Megan, you might have to do it. You might have to unmute her line.
Well, it doesn't seem to be unmuting for her.
Okay, perfect. There we
Patricia?
go.
Okay, sorry about that, Patricia.
Hi, Trisha, are you there? Okay, maybe we're having some technical difficulties with that. Trisha, just raise your hand again once your is working again there. I have another question from Kristen. She says, I think where the confusion is that AEF and EC is producing guidelines for running lessons and clinics, and facility owners and instructors are unsure if they're actually allowed to run the lessons and clinics. Are there any comments on this?
Absolutely. I've got lots of comments on that. And Aaron and I were talking about this before we started the Zoom session. Sort of full disclosure, I've been involved in several discussions with EC over these last several weeks, more than I've ever been before, as well as all the provinces from coast to coast that I'm in partnership with. And the intent of providing that guidance, as the document that was released this week, clearly stipulates, frankly, although not as clearly as I would have liked, but does say in the body of the language that this is all predicated by when the government says it's okay to do these things. It's not an alternative to government authority or health authority. EC does not have the right or the legal ability or the authority to govern over activity in the sport in anywhere other than in the show ring, frankly, where they write rules. That is the extent of their legal authority. And as much as folks are turning to the EC and to the PSOs for guidance, these organizations are doing their best to respond to those requests. But I assure you, the underlying intent to that guidance was simply to tell folks, look, this is a tool. This is a resource, not the only resource. It is a resource that you can use at your discretion to develop a risk management strategy when government allows you to do the things that you want to do in the industry. There are some very good risk management practices that are outlined in that 14-page document, and it's a biggie. It speaks about biosecurity in general terms, which is an opportunity for everyone in the industry to review other biosecurity issues that they should be very conscious of always. But I stress that EC is not saying, if you do these things, go for it. That's not what they said. What they said was, when government allows, these may be some strategies that you can employ that are consistent with guidelines and that we're hearing from public health authority. So use the tool for what it is. It's a tool. It's not the law.
Okay, thank you. Trisha, I believe that your question Mike just addressed in his answer there. So if you're still having additional questions about that, please feel free to type them into the chat. At this point, we don't seem to have any other questions. We'll give it a minute or two in case people are still typing. So yeah. We just had a question come in from Kristen. What I'm hearing is that if or should you choose to run lessons or clinics or shows, you should do so by putting appropriate protocols in place and make an application to your provincial health authority.
Yeah. So here's let's see. I'll speak to one story. It's actually in your province. Won't tell you who it was. Doesn't matter. This coach, certified coach, came to me a week and a half ago or so, and she has a barn that has some boarders and some school horses. She and her husband run the facility. Husband works off the farm. She works on the farm. They have one part-time staff person who had not refused to come to work, but was uncomfortable coming to work, wanted to stay at home and do the things that the public health authority had told them. So the employer, the coach, and her husband had agreed to that, which is good, and what you should be doing as an employer, respecting those wishes. So they had this challenge of these animals that they had to get out and exercise, and they wanted to start a few lessons up. And so we talked about it, and she heard, frankly, verbatim what you've heard today. And so what she did was she developed a list of things that she planned to do. She did some research on the Alberta government website and saw what the protocols were that the government was recommending for businesses in general. Again, sanitization stations, having personal protective equipment available for herself as the coach, as well as the client, making sure that people weren't congregating. There was no way for them to congregate. In other words, the tack room was closed. The bathroom was closed. Frankly, she wouldn't let people use the bathroom because she didn't want to be cleaning it after every use. And she restricted the movement of the people on the property so that they came to the parking lot. They went to the arena. Frankly, they didn't even come in the barn. The horse would be waiting for them, completely tacked up, so that she didn't have to do, so that the student didn't have to do those things. So the coach had sort of prepared for the session, and then when the client came, they were told to get out of the car, helmet on, like all ready to get in the tack, literally, and so go to the arena, get themselves on. If they needed a leg up, that the coach was going to wear a mask. They would require that the student wear a mask, except when they were actually riding or when they were doing something other than standing still on the horse. Again, just to try and mitigate some of the possibility of transmission. And she came up with that very long list, and she went to the public health authority in her region, and she said, look, this is what I plan to do. This is not going to be happening all day, every day, but I plan to do this, 4 hours a week, 6 hours a week, just so I can get these horses out. She got complete approval. And she got a letter back from them, signed by the public health authority, saying, go for it. Follow those guidelines, and you're doing everything that we would expect you to do. Be safe, and don't take any chances. So it can be done.
I'll expand on that as well, and just say in my follow-up email to everyone to include the COVID page, which I'll share now if you'd like to have a read. But I am going to include some of the contact information and appropriate links from the government of Alberta, because again, as we've kind of mentioned, it's only recommendations through us. There's only so much that the AEF and Mike can do at this time. Obviously, the government is who we want to talk to. So I'm going to include that information in the follow-up email as well, so you're able to touch base with the provincial health authority.
Yeah. And just so you know, and just again, a little bit of expansion on that, Megan, what I've learned, and again, this is all new to all of us, but what I've learned is in some of the smaller communities, municipalities who may share resources for garbage pickup and all those other municipal services, there's almost certainly somebody in those organizations, in those community-based municipal offices, where you pay your taxes to, frankly, is the first clue. Whoever you pay your taxes to is who you want to contact. There's going to be somebody that's assigned the task of doing public health, whether it's, and their job would include everything from, I don't know, inspecting a daycare if you were going to run one in your basement, to inspecting a restaurant in your town to make sure that the kitchen was safe, to making sure the bathrooms at the gas station out on the highway are kept clean. I mean, all those things are public health issues. So there is someone assigned the responsibility of doing those things in your community. It may not be your immediate community, it may be a regional issue, but it doesn't mean trying to pick up the phone and phone Premier Kenny and getting his blessing, because you're not going to get it. But more importantly, it's a much more regional and local issue. So I encourage you to try and drill down a little bit to find somebody local that'll realize that you're a local constituent, you're a local business operator, you're a local professional, you're a local taxpayer. And to that end, you're turning to them for guidance. Even if that guidance means that they kick you upstream, at least they should be able to give you a name or a contact person wherever they think it's more appropriate. So there is a way to find this information out.
Excellent, thank you. I have a little bit of a longer question from Stephanie here. She says AEF initially recommended in March that there should be no non-essential workers in barns during the pandemic.
Yep.
After the economy started to reopen, AEF issued a framework and recommendation for back to work for barns earlier this week. These included proper physical distancing and other protocols. Does this mean that insurers should be comfortable with these AEF recommendations, assuming barns have an approved plan in place? And then she just comments further saying, regardless, I understand from your comments that barn owners are under no obligation to allow boarders to ride or give them access to the barn if they are ensuring adequate care and turnout at this time.
So again, let's speak to that. Aaron, unless I'm mistaken, Alberta Equestrian Federation basically followed the same sort of guidance outlines, as it were, from EC, that came from EC, and is providing it in the same context, that these are tools, these are potential protocols that you may want to engage if you can get approval from local authority. It's not for AEF to get permission or not permission in this regard. As far as the insurer's comfort, so I'll speak to my own comfort because it's me on the other end of the phone. The reality is that, as I said earlier in this call, that we never stopped insuring folks. The policies were always in place, and they continue to be in full force. What's changed is what constitutes following public health authority rules that are governed by others. Essential caregivers were defined really very early on by everyone in the province and in the industry, to include veterinarians and farriers. And we all, AEF and all of us sort of expanded that to say people that may be required to exercise the animal, people that may be required to feed the animal and maintain their health and wellness. That hasn't changed. Again, this is all driven by the facility operator making first a business determination on their own based on whether or not they even want to allow boarders to come. If they do want to allow boarders to come, under what circumstances do they want them to come, then getting approval based on that circumstance or those protocols from the local public health authority, then you carry on.
So Trish is just asking for clarification, saying that we cannot operate without a letter from AHS specific to our local facility.
I would say to you that it is strongly recommended that you get such a letter, that you get some sort of approval from a local health authority. The reality is that the stables, the reference to stables, as I mentioned before, in the legislation, clearly was speaking to those essential caregivers that are required to keep these animals alive. The letter that you referred to, or the approval that I've been sort of referring to throughout the Zoom call, is about making sure that you're consulting with the authorities and know much more about the guidance in terms of mitigating the COVID-19. I'm not a medical doctor, nor is AEF. I can only tell you what I think I know as a consumer, and what I'm hearing in exactly the same spaces as you, on television and in the newspaper and on the web, about what we think as a society is going to help us contain the COVID-19 pandemic. But public health authorities are ultimately in charge. That Emergency Act in Alberta still exists today, guys, even though they've cracked it open just a little bit. The basic legislation is still in place, and I confirmed that seconds before I get on this call. And so, as far as our industry is concerned, really nothing has changed since March 17th or 15th, whenever it was that the Premier put that act in place. What they're trying to do now is bend their own rule a little bit to allow some businesses to operate under very specific guidelines, like golf courses. I know are open in Alberta, or about to be open. Marinas and other places where people put boats in the water. I'm told that some public parks, provincial parks, might be opening up soon for day use in Alberta and other places. Those are all indicators to me that things are moving forward, but it's a very slow, drawn-out process. So I'm not sure that there's any sort of absolute letter that one can get to post on the door, say, I can go forward now. Our recommendation, frankly, is simply to investigate those things with the authorities that have those guidances available that can make or break, determine whether or not you're breaking the rule.
Thank you, Mike. Stephanie, did you still want your question asked here about owners being sued because of COVID? Or Mike, if you want, you can, I guess, address that one. She says, and a barn owner cannot be sued because of COVID-19.
You got to give me more, Aaron. I don't understand the question. A barn owner be sued for what? By whom?
Just 1 second here.
And you know what I mean? Like it's too open-ended.
Megan, are you able to unmute Stephanie?
Hi, thanks very much. Hi, Mike, it's Stephanie. No,
Hi.
I just wondered in terms of, someone's level of comfort and what they might be worried about during the pandemic, whether they could be, sued by, say, a rider who happens to get, COVID while they're on their property.
Okay, now it's specific. Thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate the clarification. So we've had that question a bunch of times, and I honestly don't know the answer to that. And we've actually gone as far as going to Lloyd's of London, who provides the insurance coverage for most of our liability in the sport, frankly, from all carriers or for all brokers and stuff, to sort of ask that question. And the comments we always get back are, well, we can't, no one can predict with certainty whether or not someone sues. Whether or not it's going to be successful is another question, and a very different one.
Right.
You could sue me for being too loud and obnoxious today, and frankly, I'd have to defend it. But you know what I mean? Whether it's frivolous or not is another day. But here's what I was going to say.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all agree that we're learning as a society that this COVID stuff can hang around hard surfaces for a period of time. That they've told us what we're supposed to do about that and sanitize everything and all those other great things. But the reality is that COVID could be contracted in a crowd environment just by airborne particulates that are breathed. It's incredibly sensitive. So I suppose the allegation could come forward that, I've never been anywhere else except my living room and your barn.
Mm-hmm.
I got sick, so it must have happened there.
I see.
Okay?
I see.
Great. Prove it.
Well, exactly.
Have you got a swab from the tack room that says you got it?
Right. And this is assuming that, there was a plan approved and you had proper sanitation, proper distancing protocol, etc. So
and listen, I have no doubt. I say this to you all, and it's just because of litigation and the way that it works in society generally in the West, in Western economies. Somebody's going to sue somebody for exactly this. I promise you. It's just it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Well, sure, you can go on a trail ride and sign a waiver, and somebody can still get sued if they offer trail rides and somebody gets hurt. So.
and good segue. So I'm gonna do this too because it's important. So I've been asked about waivers, and I've been asked about specific waivers for COVID. To say, Stephanie, if you're prepared to sign this form, and the form says, yeah, I know COVID exists, and I don't care, and I'm not going to sue you if I get COVID at your barn.
Right.
Really, I don't know. I've been asked this question a number of times. I'll be honest with you. The U.S. Equestrian Federation just last night, I think.
Yes.
They released a whole program for restarting the equestrian sport down in the States, which is very different, obviously, than it is here in Canada. But in terms of the laws of the land, but they too, like EC, have come forward with some recommendations and guidance on what a horse show might look like at the end of a long day or whatever. And they've actually got a risk form that speaks specifically to not COVID, but just standard language in the risk form that says, I understand that horses are dumb and I could die. I mean, the standard stuff we always see. But so I'm assuming those risks for bodily injury and disease.
Mm-hmm.
Communicable disease is now in the language in the risk form. So that caught my eye. Somebody brought it to my attention overnight. I've got spies everywhere. God bless them. So I'll be honest with all of you here. I mean, you're the first to hear this, but I've literally got it sitting on my desk here. Their form to try and do an analysis of how we might be able to incorporate the word disease or communicable disease in our pre-approved legal documents that so many of our coaches use and facility operators use. So I can imagine that those forms might change a little bit in the future just to have that inclusion. But I'm not bringing special attention to COVID because next time it'll be, we're talking about COVID-19 now because it originated in the year 2019.
Correct.
What if there's a COVID-20?
Right.
I shouldn't say when. There's going to be COVID-20. It'll be a mutation, a deviation. It'll be something, right? So that's my take on it.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Mike.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Stephanie. So just to confirm, Mike, can you add COVID to the liability waiver for riders and boarders?
I don't want it on their waiver form. I don't, because frankly, it's assuming that somebody, see, here's the problem, guys, and I'm not a lawyer, so I have to say that out loud. So this is just my opinion from doing this stuff for 27 years. The point in an acknowledgement of risk form is to help people understand the inherent risks of being involved with a 1,000-pound animal, right? I mean, let's just boil this down to what it is. A form that is used properly, potentially, and I underline the word potentially, might be used as one defense tool if you were sued, right? So that doesn't change by putting in COVID or not putting in COVID. The point of the risk form is to have a conversation, is to have some sort of an interaction with your customer to say, these are the inherent risks. These are the things that are very real. These are 1,000-pound animals. They do really goofy stuff, whatever. If we start getting really specific about COVID, what are we telling people? That they're supposed to understand as consumers that they know everything there is to know about COVID, which they don't. That they understand that even breathing on my farm or me breathing back at them constitutes a risk. And that they're saying, yeah, okay, I've considered that. So I'll sign a piece of paper saying I'm not going to sue you because I understand that. Honestly, folks, there's not a chance in heck that that's going to stand up in a court of law because consumers don't know what COVID does. None of us know, really. Medical profession is still trying to figure this out, for goodness sake. A layperson is not going to truly understand the risks of being in proximity with somebody who may or may not be asymptomatic. I mean, we hear these terms now like we understand them, but I dare say that most don't. So it would not be a very good defense tool. I would much rather boarding facilities and coaching professionals have candid conversation about the bigger picture of the risk, include the potential for COVID being present in our society currently is just one of many things. I have no issue with that particularly, but I do have an issue of saying to folk, here's a COVID form. And if you sign this, you can't sue me if you get COVID. Well, that infers then that I know enough about it that I'm protecting you from it as well. And I have a problem with that. So that's a non-legal opinion, but it's mine.
Thank you, Mike. At this point, are there any other questions from our group today? Otherwise, we'll proceed in wrapping our session up. We'll give it a minute or two here if that's okay.
It's been a great group, Erin. Awesome group.
Yes, very good questions.
Yeah, no, I've done I don't know, probably 15 of these now, and it's just they're just helpful, and I love hearing people's perspective on this. We don't have all the answers, any of us, but it's we just have to move forward together. We're all in this together. If that horse show doesn't run next week, we're gonna be okay. Let's just stay healthy. That's what I want.
We're getting lots of. Thank you guys all for joining us too. I think our questions are pretty much wrapped up for today. So thank you so much, Mike. Megan, I'll let you finish up with some closing remarks here.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us today. Again